Welcome to The Rubber Meets the Road Economics, the podcast where we explore the driving forces behind today's economy and their real-world implications. Join investor Hunter Craig as he interviews Professor Edwin Burton from the University of Virginia, delving into the complexities of economics with clarity and insight. Whether you're an economics enthusiast or just curious about how economic policies affect your daily life, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome, Professor Edwin T. Burton. We're recording this on the 17th of July, 2025. Things are happening quickly, changing rapidly. Professor, looks like we're going to have $40 trillion in debt in the next 12 months. Interest rates go to 5%. We have $2 trillion in debt payments. We bring in less than $5 trillion. That remaining $3 trillion won't cover Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, much less defense, or all the payments to the universities. Can you speak to the university funding, and are we, by reducing some funding to universities, possibly increasing the ability to survive in the future when funds are cut short because we have a national debt and so much of our liquidity is going to debt payments?
Boy, lots of questions in there, Hunter. It's good to see you today again for another podcast. The university subject is kind of interesting, and if you're on a university campus, like I am, I spent the last 56 years on university campuses, both at the University of Virginia and Cornell University, Rice University. I was a professor at all those places. But I spent most of my career at University of Virginia, 37 years here. This will be 38 coming up this fall. Got 200 kids lined up for finance in the fall. Another fun semester. So the question is research. What goes on? Now, I think you have to separate out how the money is used in research. When the government gives grant money to a university, if they're giving it, say, to develop a medical procedure where something has to be purchased and you have to do experiments that are costly and you have to hire a whole bunch of lab assistants, that's one thing. But if you're giving it to, let's say, giving it to me, Ed Burton studying inflation and macroeconomics, and so I apply for a grant and they grant me $400,000. So what happens when they do that? That would be sort of a typical grant for if I had applied to get one. Well, 60% of it goes to the university, or 50% in some cases, but it's usually something like that for a, quote, overhead. Who knows what that is? Nobody knows. So I end up getting $200,000. So what do I use it for? I'm working on inflation. That involves 2 or 3 of my grad students. We're running regressions, which are cheap. You can actually run them for almost no money. We use MATLAB or something like that. So we don't have ways to spend money. And one way to spend the money is maybe we should do this research in Sicily. So I can book a VRBO for a month and the 3 of us can go over to Sicily and sit out and look at the water or something. That's another use. And that's not an infrequent use to use it to grab some of your colleagues, go to a nice location and have fun. But the main use, if you're, say, in humanities or arts and sciences, is to buy teaching time. To say, oh, here, I've got this money. Here, your university can have it to hire somebody to teach my classes. And so grad students will then typically teach the courses. At Harvard, this is the favorite game. If you go to Harvard, you almost never see a real professor. You see a grad student because the professors all have all these grants. And I've sat in the faculty lounge and listened. I got a new grant. That means I don't teach those students anymore. You'd be amazed. I mean, I live in a university. I've lived in them for years. I can name a whole bunch of people who really do love students, but there are a lot of people that don't. And I think tenure has that effect. You get tenure, you know you're not going to be fired. You get tired of teaching the same thing and seeing these kids come in, and you have to go in and lecture to them and all that. There's not much interest in real teaching anymore. There used to be. But that's changed enormously in the last 40 years. The big thing is research. I don't want to be too critical, but no, I'm probably overstating the case. But let me say this. The incentives to do serious research are almost negligible. And here's why. If you're a young assistant professor at any of the good universities, you need to publish a lot of papers to get tenure. So how do you do that? You have to pick a subject. What subject do you want to pick? You want to pick a subject where all the greatest minds have been working on it, and there's a whole bunch of people really looking at it because it's really, really important. Or how about something so obscure that no one on the history of the planet would ever be interested? Let's talk about basket weaving in 1832 in some small town in New Hampshire. Nobody possibly could have ever been interested in that. And I can get 50 publications out of that. If you want to just die laughing, I was talking to a young graduate from Harvard yesterday. He was working on a project. He asked about grants, same question. I said, if you really want to enjoy yourself, you went to Harvard, so go look on Harvard's economics website and look at the working papers, just the names of the working papers. And after you pick yourself up off the floor from laughter, you'll ask yourself, do you think the average taxpayer should be paying higher taxes to support the topics you read on those working papers? Half of the working papers, you'd wonder, why would anybody be interested in that? That'll be your instant reaction. I'd defy anybody listening to this podcast, do the same thing. You can go to any major university, go to Penn and look working papers in the economics department, see what they work on. Well, let me tell you some subjects they don't work on. Inflation, they don't work on that. Tariffs, they don't work on that. Now, that's not to say that much engineering research, much medical research, there are a lot of things in research that should be funded. The Trump people should not blow everything away. But a lot of the research shouldn't be funded. A lot of it is just buying teaching time and permit people to go on fancy vacations. I'm just not comfortable that the truck driver making $70,000 a year should pay an extra chunk of his taxes to fund that.
So what happens, Professor, when the federal government runs out of money? Fairly soon, we're going to have less than $3 trillion to spend on all programs. We're currently spending $7 trillion, bringing in fewer dollars than $5 trillion. What happens? What happens? You've got Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. Hard to touch those. You don't have any money left for anything else.
Well, in practice, you know exactly what will happen. They'll bring in the central bank.
And print money.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, you could just abolish the whole tax system, get rid of it. And from now on, let's get rid of the IRS. And we'll just have the central bank print up $8 trillion every year. That'd be about the pace they were printing it up in 2020 and 21. So we know they can do it. They've done it before. And we'll just get rid of taxation and we'll run inflation rates that'll, eventually catch up with the Weimar Republic. In the meantime, it'll look like Turkey for a while. Nobody has the stomach to face the real problem, and that is resolving the cost of healthcare. That is the number one cause of our problems. It's true that we spend money foolishly on grants to universities and foolishly on a lot of things. Let me defend Elon Musk for a minute. I mean, yes, he went after some things that some people think are pretty good, but one of the things he exposed is there's nobody minding the store. We spend money on absolutely ridiculous things. It's not fair to the taxpayer. I'm not against spending money on a lot of things where the money was taken away, but I think there's got to be a gatekeeper. There's got to be something. The government just can't get in and throw money to their friends. Remember, a lot of that's going to their friends. If you trace where a lot of this grant money goes for a lot of things, they go to politicians and politicians' brothers. The government's just too big, but that's not going to solve the debt problem. The debt problem is driven by the entitlements completely. Social Security can be fixed. There's a lot of easy fixes to Social Security, and it should be fixed. But healthcare is a different story. People are living longer. The demographics are getting worse. You have to change the way we deliver healthcare in this country, and you have to have more free market solutions brought in. If the government runs everything, they're going to run it inefficiently, and they do. And so that has to be tackled. And I think, again, I believe in getting both political parties together, get everybody in the room and say, look at the healthcare spending. Now, what do? We need something that puts us on a path that the country could sustain. And I think that's what we should do. I don't think one partisan solution on either side will ever stay put because we have elections. And so notice the last few years, Trump gets in, he goes one way. Biden gets in, he goes the other way. Trump gets in, he goes the other way. What do you think is going to happen if the Democrats win congressional elections? We're going to be in for probably another impeachment round and just passing all these laws to do various things. The country just can't be flip-flopping. There has to be some kind of middle-of-the-road consensus on solving healthcare expenditures, and it'll center around free market solutions. If the government decides who gets healthcare, then guess who gets healthcare? All the rich people. Because they're the ones that have influence with government. People think somehow the government's the friend of the poor. The government has never been the friend of the poor. The government's the friend of the rich.
So in a recession, government receipts decline faster than a reduction in government spending. U.S. GDP number was revised down First quarter of 2025, negative. 2 quarters of negative growth is technically a recession. Where do you think we are now? Will the second quarter be negative? And what do you see for the second half of 2025?
Such an interesting time. I'm kind of Mr. Gloom and Doom, so just color me gloom and doom. But the world's not looking like that. The data has come in pretty strong. If you're actually following the data on the economy, it looks pretty good. Retail sales this week were good. And the stock market is an all-time high. So everywhere you look, everything's rosy. But I think the seeds are in place for really some troublesome times coming. Normally, when you have a recession, what happens? Rates come down. So mortgage rates would slip down to 2.5%, 3%, absent the size of the national debt. But that's not going to happen this time. You can see how stubborn rates are here. Every time they try to come down, they go right back up. And poor Powell is hamstrung by the fact that the bill yields won't come down, so he can't do anything. He wants to do it. You can be sure that Powell goes to bed every night praying the Treasury bills will come down so he can give Trump a cut, but it won't accommodate him, and it's not going to. Not at least, certainly by this next one coming up in a week or two. I see weakness in the economy mostly because of the tariffs. I think that's the biggest issue. But secondly, the interest rates. The debt, the U.S. Treasury, by absorbing this much of domestic savings and foreign savings that are available, takes it away from the private sector. I mean, that's just the way it is. And if rates go up, just do the arithmetic. We're going to hit $40 trillion. Now, I remember Janet Yellen when Biden first came in. And she's a friend of mine, by the way, and I think brilliant economist. She is. She's one of the best economists there is. But boy, she went political. She said, look at this. We've got zero rates. We can go big. That's a direct quote. Well, they went big and rates went big too. So if multiply 40 trillion times, I don't know, pick a number, 6. How's that? That's $2.4 trillion just interest on the debt. And these numbers just get bigger and bigger and bigger. When you hit 50 trillion and you're staring at 7, that's 3.5 trillion. Pretty soon they're just, what are you going to cut out? All the schools, public schools, they go. What else goes? I mean, every department in Washington, because the entitlement spendings people keep saying they're untouchable. If they're untouchable, everything else goes. Have to get rid of the Supreme Court, the federal courts, and the district courts. Can't afford those anymore. Just one by one, you'll get rid of them. But the politicians won't do that. The politicians will say, look at that beautiful central bank down the road. They can print money. I've got a couple of trillion I need. So let's sell them 2 trillion in treasuries and take the cash and pay our bills.
But doesn't that make the problem worse down the road?
Oh, much worse. That spirals the problem on. But everything the politicians do make it worse.
So right now we have the ability, the opportunity to cut spending. How much longer do you think we have that opportunity before we enter a debt spiral that we can't recover from?
I think we're in the debt spiral. I think we've passed that point. I think it's just not obvious we've passed it. But politically, you saw in the Big Beautiful Bill, which there are other descriptions of that bill. What did it do? It really didn't cut spending at all. And the minor spending cuts that are in that bill, some of the Republicans jumped ship because of the very few spending cuts in that bill. One of the things that we do with Medicaid spending is some states provide Medicaid spending to people up to twice the average income in the state. Now, Medicaid spending is supposed to be for poor people. That's how everybody describes it, but that's not where it goes. States can make the conditions any way they want, depending on what state you're living in. If you live in California, it's one thing. If you live in New York, it's something else. If you live in Virginia, it's something else. What the bill did try to do is stop the federal government from picking up the freight in every single state. Make the states pay for it. I agree with that. If the states are going to let people with twice the average income in the state have Medicaid, well, why don't they pay for that? Why should some farmer in Iowa foot the bill for somebody who's got twice his income? There's a lot of unfairness in the way the entitlements work. Social Security is a great example. Warren Buffett, he gets $60,000 a year, and the guy that cuts his grass, if he lives long enough, gets $12,000 a year. How's that fair? Buffett gets 5 times as much. You could say, well, he put in more, but that guy will die probably with no spouse, and that's the end of it. His heirs get nothing. He's got spouses and heirs, and they'll do fine. His wife, if he happens to die, gets his Social Security till she dies. The spouses can receive it, but if you don't have a spouse, it dies with you. Social Security is terribly regressive. People don't know that. They think it's good. It's not good.
What does the U.S. economy look like with $50 trillion in debt, 10% interest rates.
I think you know the answer to that one, Hunter. We're in big trouble. I think the economy will grind to a halt. All economies that do stuff like that grind to a halt. Look at Turkey.
What are you going to do to protect yourself financially? What would you do?
Well, the best you can do if you're going to have massive inflation and high interest rates is to buy a lot of assets that will maintain their real value. For example, if you go back to the 70s where we had all that inflation, there was only one asset that worked. You made no money in the stock market. You got killed in the bond market. What asset worked? Your home. And your home went flying. And if you mortgage it, it's even better because the value of that debt you owed the bank, that 3% mortgage you took when rates got to 18, that looked pretty good. And you weren't in a big hurry to get out of that thing. So that's the kind of asset that works when you embark on one of these big inflationary things. It's a real asset of some kind. Gold, probably, but gold has no reason to have value, but gold probably will work. Anything that is a real asset and has reason to have value. Think how energy did. Oil did great. If you were in the oil business, those are golden years because the barrel price went from, it was $2 a barrel in the 60s, $2 a barrel, if you can imagine. Then you had two oil shocks. One took it to 14. The next one took it to 34 in October of 79. So those things work. Commodities work. So do homes, buildings sometimes work, depending on the building. But anything that had a lot of debt. What you want to do if that's all going to happen is get a whole lot of fixed rate debt. And by the way, if you don't know how to do that, it's pretty easy. Put on variable rate and do a swap. A huge swap market. You have to pay a lot, but at least you'll fix the rate. And what do you care whether it's 4 or 5 when rates gets to 25? It doesn't really matter very much. So I would encourage people who want to defend themselves, go borrow everything you can borrow and do it at variable rate. Call up your friend at Morgan Stanley and ask what the swap rates are for fixed rate against variable rate. They'll do it. You won't like the price, but who cares? You'll be sure happy if this thing gets out of control. The price for protection is always expensive. But I would do it if I were you, if you believe this is happening. We're not at the stage where we're sure this is happening. Well, I think we're out of control. That doesn't mean we can't have some kind of an event. Let's say something happens and all of a sudden, one thing that could spur it, for example, Japan's having trouble in their market. Japan has had trouble. Bond yields have gone way up. What if they just start really accelerating? If that happens, that could trigger a rise in rates across the world. Japan's a pretty big market, and it could affect the U.S. rates as well. So all of a sudden, the long bond is not 5, it's 6. The tenure is not 4.5, it's 5.5. Now mortgage rates are 8. Now financing of high-yield debt now balloons out to 13, 14, 15. That kind of scary event, almost similar to what happened in 1987 and 1988, that might encourage the political folks to say, wait a minute, maybe we need to tackle it. But Hunter, I don't think one political party can tackle it. I think you got to get them both in the room. I don't think any substantive reforms have ever been done by one party because the other party eventually gets in. You might think, oh, we're in power forever. You're not. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Democrats take both the House and Senate next year. And if they do, what is Trump going to do? And then he might lose the presidency. I can't imagine who would win it for the Democrats, but somebody may. And it's logical that could happen. I mean, these things do go in cycles. Who was the last 3 or 4 presidents, if you look back? Now, if that happens, anything that Trump does is all going to be wiped out, and then we'll go down a different road, and then that'll overreach, and then we'll go down a different road. At some point, both parties, and even at the extremes, you put AOC in the same room with Rand Paul. Why not? And if you do that, maybe they can sit down and you say, look at the numbers. We cannot provide health care in this way. Look at our demographics. It's not going to work. So we need to make some hard decisions. We can't finance everything. You know, if there's a $10 million thing that prolongs life for a year, $10 million is what it costs, you can't provide it to everybody. We're not rich enough. So you provide it to no one?
Professor, the U.S. debt problem is crystal clear, yet the S&P 500 is at an all-time high. The United States is not unique in that its financial problems, the deficit, the annual debt.
No, it's a global problem.
It's a global problem. So can we limp along for several years by printing money? Is that what we're doing?
That's not going to work. And you're going to have to print more and more. Let me say something about the stock market, because people are always asking me what I think about the stock market. And I remember recently at a meeting with a large pension fund, I said, let me tell you guys that over the last 5 or 6 years, if you followed my advice as to what the market was going to do every year, you wouldn't even have any money left. I mean, I have no ability to predict the stock market, and I don't think anybody else does either. I think the market is way overvalued. That's consistent with it going from where it is now to 20% higher by the end of the year. Nothing would surprise me. Stocks can trade wherever they want to trade, at any level, high or low. The way to own stocks is not to watch where they trade, but to buy them and forget you own them. If you just do that, you follow that simple procedure, just buy stocks and say, I don't know what's going on in the world, I don't even want to think about it, and you plan to hold for 20 years, you'll be very happy. If your idea is, how do I buy this stuff so that a year from now I'll look great? There is no answer to that. There is no way to do that. And I spent, let's see how many years, I hate to think, let me just add them all up, about 50 some odd years involved in the stock market itself. So you'd think over that 50 years I'd know something. I'd be able to say, oh, it's going to go up, oh, it's going to go down. Well, I can say that. I'm really good at saying that. I can say, oh, I hate this market, or oh, I love this market, and that's worth nothing. It just is. Nobody can predict the stock market.
Professor, the Federal Reserve meets next July 30th. You've stated there's no way, given where the U.S. 2-month Treasury is today, 4.34, that the Federal Reserve can lower rates. We're going to find out in 2 weeks.
Well, wait, I'll give you an exception to that. If there's some unbelievable event that forces them in to buy treasuries, if something happens, bank failures or something like that, there's an extraordinary event that pushes rates down.
But they have to use the balance sheet to do
They'll
that.
have to use the balance sheet, then that can change the story. But barring something like that, there'll be no rate cut. But you'll see it. You'll see it when they do it. When they do it, they'll push those rates down, and they might even take the target range down 100 basis points if it goes down that much. They'll follow the yields on the Treasury bills. That's the point.
On the 2-month Treasury.
2 and 3, yeah, right in there.
2 and 3-month Treasury.
They'll just follow them. Wherever they go, they follow. They're not a leader. They're a follower.
Professor, we can't wait to see your grade on the exam in the next 2 weeks. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Hunter. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for the Rubber Meets the Road Economics podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, remember to subscribe and stay updated with future episodes. Join us soon for more conversations about modern economics on the Rubber Meets the Road Economics podcast.